Welcome, everyone, and good day. Thanks for joining us for today's discussion on Freedom to Move, hosted by America Walks. Wanted to give a shout out to our fearless leader and our executive director, Mike McGinn. Mike, are you here to give a quick shout out?
I am here, Erica, and
All right. Yes.
and I just want to thank. If I could make one comment, it's just I want to say that this topic is one of great concern to America Walks because walkability involves, as you will hear, far more than just physical infrastructure, as most people tend to think. And I also just want to say that this position is not just endorsed by our board, but driven by our board. And we have here today four America Walks board members who actually find themselves in the middle of these issues on a regular basis. And I'm really proud of our board and their desire to elevate this issue. So thank you, Erica, and all of you for your leadership on this.
Thank you, Mike. We appreciate you. We appreciate your leadership. As a national voice for building public spaces that allow people to safely walk and move, America Walks knows that conversations about mobility justice must include those who are denied the freedom to move. Today, people are denied the ability to move safely based on how they look, where they're from, and how they are perceived. Mobility justice demands that we confront surveillance, policing, and xenophobia embedded in our transportation systems. It demands we stop asking people to prove their worth before they can move without fear. It means acknowledging our streets, sidewalks, and bus stops are not neutral but political. Who is allowed to use them safely and without punishment, and who is targeted and excluded are shaped by the systems of power. This frames today's discussion about freedom to move. I am Erica Gilmore, the Vice Chair of America Walks Board and the Metropolitan Trustee for Nashville and Davidson County. And today with us, we have our wonderful board members, Abdullahi Abdulle, José Leal, and Nailah Pope-Harden. They will now give introductions. Abdullahi, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Erica, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone, wherever you are in our lovely country. I am Abdullahi Abdulle. I'm an immigrant from East Africa, specifically from Somalia, and Somali Americans have been making the news lately, not because of our choosing, but because we're dragged into some federal policy debates. And I'm a founder and a practice leader for a small consulting firm called Humanize Minnesota. And I am really grateful to be here with you all. Walking and walkability is very personal and deeply important to me since I can remember. It's the only mode of transportation that made me happy, that I could always rely on, especially growing up in a community that was very connected and things were located closely. So I'll just start with that and leave the rest of my remarks to the rest of the discussion today.
Thank you. Jose?
Yes. ¿Cómo están hoy? How's everybody today? My name is José Jesús Loera, proud son of immigrant farm workers, first generation born here in the U.S. My family is originally from the Pueblo Malpaso, which is in el municipio de Calvillo en Aguascalientes, which is a state in Central Mexico. I'm joining today from Sacramento, California, but I grew up down in Southern California on the beautiful lands of the Kumeyaay, which I remain connected to through family members who are citizens of Apostol Band. I personally consider myself a truth teller, and I think laughter is really good medicine. In more formal terms, I'm a principal landscape architect here at MIG, co-founder of our Davidson Building Studios, and it's an honor and privilege to be here today. As Abdullahi mentioned, for me, walking for a big part of my life was pure necessity, which is why I think the important work that America Walks is doing is really falls in line with my passions and lived experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Do you have Nailah?
Yep. Good. From where I am, we're still technically morning. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nailah Pope-Harden. I am really excited to see everyone interested in this conversation, see how many folks we have on the webinar, and speak on this panel today about a topic that is deeply important and close to my heart. I'm coming to you today from Sacramento, California, unceded Miwok and Nisenan land. And my background, I spent 20 years in community organizing, community development, working on a host of issues, but would always land at transportation. I think for me, it is, there's so many social justice issues you can care about. And I just want to make sure people can get to where they need to go. I want to make sure people can get to where they need to go so that they can fight for their rights and all the other avenues. Transportation being that connector, being that vein, being that access to opportunity. It's just really important, and being able to advocate for folks to be able to move freely is deeply important to me. Currently, I serve as the Deputy Director of Equity and Tribal Affairs at the Department of Transportation for the state of California, Caltrans. I'm not speaking today in that capacity, but I do bring my experience in that position into, as with all my other experiences, into everything I'll be saying today. So I look forward to the panel.
Thank you, Nailah. I think you've each discussed introductions to yourself and what you do, and you're each experts in your own area, but you are speaking as board members today. We want to do that disclaimer up front. And so we want to talk about, what does the freedom to move mean to you? Abdullahi, can you lead us off with this, please?
Yes, thank you, Erica. Simply, the freedom to move for me means just that I can step out of my home without fear of retaliation, without fear of harassment or intimidation, without the need to, look for documentation, making sure that I have my passport or other legal paperwork before I can feel like I can just step out to the sidewalk and walk freely. Those, as basic as they sound, have not been a reality. Many people, many community members, many of my neighbors, especially here in Minnesota. I don't know if I mentioned that. I live in Minnesota, joining you from New Brighton, Minnesota, small community outside of the Twin Cities here. That has not been the experience of my neighbors here in Minnesota. Folks have been traveling with their passports, which is very risky, really, because on the one hand, yes, you need to make sure you can prove that you are a citizen. But on the other hand, you can lose that, or it could be taken away, and now you are even at risk to be further harassed and put in harm's way. So to go back to the simple question of what freedom to move means to you, it just means to me all those things, that I can get out of my house without fear of intimidation and harassment, and also just knowing that, maybe just to add, that there is a safe space for me to walk outside. Those spaces have already been, most of the time, created by our governments, local, state, and regional governments, things like sidewalks and other public right of ways. But now it has made it so difficult for so many people to use those spaces that have been made available for us, and really using our public dollars too. So that's what that freedom to move means to me.
Thank you, Abdullahi. I think you make a great point about sharing the same thing, that the government created opportunities to move around in terms of infrastructure, that socially those same things are being taken away and politically by the government. That is such a paradox. José, would you like to talk about what freedom to move means to you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for me, freedom to move is, really more than the ability to get from one place to another. I think for me, mobility has always been a lot deeper. Freedom to move is really about dignity, safety, belonging, and belonging to the spaces we move through every day, right? Sometimes we have to move through these spaces by pure necessity. So I feel we commonly think walking as a basic expression of freedom, yet as you can see today, that freedom isn't really equally experienced for many communities. I mean, immigrants, indigenous, communities of colors, and even our allies, right? So the public right-of-way can also be a space of surveillance, exclusion, and risk, which is what we're really experiencing today. So, freedom to move, once again, for me, begins with the ability to walk, gather, and exist in the public realm without fear of enforcement, displacement, or needing to be invisible. I think the infrastructure really needs to reflect and respect the communities it serves. And ultimately, freedom to move is really about spatial justice, and where everyone, regardless of who we are and where we come from, should be able to move through the landscape with safety, dignity, and self, and a sense of belonging, I guess.
Thank you, Jose. You gave us some very good words to articulate what we're experiencing. I like when you say spatial dignity. That is very important. Nailah, do you want to continue to build on what they have shared?
Yeah, so I wholeheartedly agree with everything that has already been said. I think for me, freedom to move it feels almost a little loaded, right? Because to me, it's like asking someone the ability to smell. When you're sick, you think like, oh, did I take it for granted that I could smell? And similar with the ability and freedom to move, it's something that should just be inherent, something that for most of us should just be a right. But when we don't have it, we feel it, we know it, and we can feel oppressed by it. I think to also add on to it, I love the idea of dignity and being able to move, but it's also the freedom to choose where you move. To me, when we talk about the freedom to move, and to Jose's point, like movement, we can also talk about upward mobility. We can talk about like movement and mobility in a broader sense, and the ability to choose, the freedom to choose where you're going, how you're going, and making sure that that is safe, that it is just, that it is affordable. I think all of those are kind of wrapped up when I think about what the freedom to move means to me, that I can just pick where I want to go and get there.
Definitely. Thanks for sharing that. And I think you definitely hit on something when you talk about it seems, I think each of you shared, it seems so fundamental, basic of where we go, but it impacts so many things. And for so many different people that live in the United States, even though we're all promised equality, liberty, and justice, it's sometimes you have to navigate and go a different direction because you don't have that ability to move, whether it's fear of surveillance, fear of interacting with the police, fear of certain neighborhoods, fear of being stigmatized. So, Jose, if we say everyone deserves to move freely, safely, and with dignity, what does that actually require in our transportation systems?
I mean, I guess it starts with things being built around people first, right? It's not about speed, it's not about efficiencies or vehicular movement. It's about basically mobility as a civil right, right? So I think this requires us to see systems in a way that protects our civil rights. Um, so at a basic level, I mean, it requires just safe infrastructure for all modes of movement. But I guess dignity in transportation also requires fair governance and policy, right? And that's kind of where the equity piece comes in. As we said, people should be able to get to where they want to go within their communities without the fear of discrimination, policing, immigration, surveillance. I think it also requires equitable investment. I mean, so often we see that the investment isn't equitable, right? The places that need it the most don't have it. Um, and I think finally, freedom to move with dignity really requires community authority in shaping the transportation decisions that are being made, right? Because it's for us, it should be by us. And I think this really affirms that everyone belongs in the public space and has a right to move through it. Um, a pitch for my designers and planners out there, I think, is this really should be challenging us to think beyond transportation efficiencies. Like I said, streetscapes are not just corridors for movement, they're cultural spaces, right? And they can really help affirm our own identities, support community, even to recognize indigenous sovereignty and their presence on the land. And I think we really need to challenge ourselves, especially in times like today, to really look beyond um, these perspectives.
Thank you. And I think what you've shared is very important because it seems like, especially when we talk about movement and how we get around, we definitely, and I know I'm in the South, we tend to be more car centric. So it's like cars first, and then let us design around the cars versus, to your point, people and culture and the things that are so layered. So I think that that's a wonderful point. Thank you for lifting that up, and maybe we'll focus that. I mean, because we are people, it should be that, but we begin to focus more and more around material things versus ourselves, the human aspect of ourselves. Nailah, how does public spaces like sidewalks, plazas, and transit stops functions as sites of inclusion or exclusion in terms of mobility justice?
Yeah, so I'm a Black woman. So I often walk and intersect with spaces that I'm like, oh, this was not built for me. I was not in mind. I was not in mind to be one of the typical users. I also, where I am in my life right now is in that sandwich generation. So I have a son who's 7 years old, and he is what they call an eloper. He runs. If you're not holding him down, he's running. I also am caring for two parents who have disability in an old age. Their bodies are tired, and it's showing. And if we're not creating spaces, and I'm also remiss to say, like, we're in Women's History Month, right? And we know that women, like, similar to me, we're number one caretakers. So we are on the road, we are interacting, we're doing non-essential, the most non-essential travel. And if these spaces aren't made for inclusion, then they are excluding. If we're building transit stops that aren't don't have like bus shelters, and we're in a space or in a climate where we need those, if we don't have, then folks are not going to feel included, and they will be excluded. It doesn't give a sense of belonging, and I think we often forget how important belonging is also to our daily lives. To feel like this is my community, that I'm meant to be here, that I'm able to move freely, that the infrastructure is set up so that it's convenient and that it's accessible for me. All of those are really, really important. And if we're not designing, especially those public spaces, to be able to be inclusive of the broadest sweep of people, then we are excluding. Then we're building it then we are alienating particular people in our communities. I also challenge, and I think for me, the reason why I deeply love doing inclusion work is because it's curiosity. It's how adults imagine and play. I have a space, I have a bus stop. How do I make it so that this bus stop can be welcoming to everyone in my community? For me, that's a fun challenge. I think and the work of inclusion is really about curiosity and imagination. And in many places, our public spaces, like our plazas, our sidewalks, our bus stops, are just lacking that imagination and that curiosity about other people in our community.
I like it. So I do have a quick follow-up question for you. And considering the space you work in, I think you bring some very good points, especially with women with kids, seniors that are walking on those public spaces. So what would you advise the listening audience to do so that it can be more inclusive of the people that it serves? How can they get more involved in the infrastructure and the decisions of that? Or is it something that's just so locked in? If it doesn't meet these specs, then there's no room for public input. Can you just speak to that? And then we're coming to Abdullahi. So you get ready, Abdullahi.
So I think to my point around curiosity, and I know that we have like a wide breadth of folks on audience who have different backgrounds, different means of activating and being a part of these conversations. But I think it really starts with curiosity. And I'm going to do the most generous read possible, that oftentimes it is just we go with what's easiest, what's cheapest, and what's readily available to us. So we need to be having more conversations about what type of infrastructure is actually inclusive. One of my pet projects on the side is, speaking of public spaces, parks. If a park does not have a gate around it, I can't take my son because, again, he's a runner. That little gate is helpful. But when I brought that to our parks board, they were like, oh, we hadn't considered that. So as much as you can, expand the conversation, expand what's being considered, being really curious, asking those questions, finding those best practices is really helpful. And then I think depending on where you fall, what your appetite for activism is, you can go deeper there, but it all starts with like curiosity and an interest in being inclusive.
Thank you. And I'll do a plug. Miracle Walks is a place where you can find best practices if you want to have best practices. And for our listening audience, we will have a time for Q&A. So if you got some questions, you can go ahead and start putting those in the chat. Abdullahi, you are in Minnesota. I mean, ground zero right now. So would you please address for us, what are some places or the ways that you've seen the public take control and take back the streets and the communities to protect their freedoms and their freedoms of their neighbors?
Yes, thank you. It has been amazing to really see how communities in Minnesota have been coming together. I'm an immigrant to this state in the last 15 years or so, and I'm really not to not speaking ill of any other state, but I'm glad I chose Minnesota because this is really an amazing, and I'm sure there's so many others wonderful states out there, but this is really there's a saying Minnesota nice that I used to hear but didn't understand until the immigration enforcement was happening here, and people were coming out in negative 37, right, and protesting and showing support for each other and having signs about walkability like that are about public spaces. There was one protest that I participated where people were chanting streets are for us. And that is amazing and empowering. People know the power that they hold. And eventually those protests and the public pushback and the community organizing and people that are made sure that, there are, if our neighbors are afraid to go outside and enjoy their lives and go to their visits, clinics, and seek healthcare treatments or go to work, we can't also just kind of move about life as usual. We have to be out there for them. I can't count the amount of times that I got text messages from coworkers and colleagues and neighbors checking in on me, and that meant so much. And then but that is one thing, but to see people put actions behind those things is something else. For people to actually put their lives on the line, and that tragically happened, right? Like we lost Renee Good and Alex Preddy for nothing but just showing up and being good neighbors and standing up for their neighbors. It's us, and I think. I also want to touch on this thing where historically, I think in the past, I grew up starting as a transportation planner. There was this understanding that there's maybe a line between professionalism and work and politics and activism. And like, we're just no politics at work. But what are you going to do when politics show up to work? And now you design all these beautiful spaces, public spaces with art installations. But people, if they become staging grounds for military police, what benefit does that bring? So I think Minnesota has shown the rest of our nation that we can't just kind of stay on the sidelines and watch the news as our cities are overtaken by military and enforcement that is just hostile and really not effective. The people that they are chasing on the streets are all citizens, and they are taking it like they are impeding in their human rights and all breaking all kinds of laws. So I think it was great to see all the different ways that communities have been saying no to what has been happening, and I think that is as America Walks, this is something that we have been part of and can be part of, and I think all our wonderful listeners to this webinar can also and I'm sure have been part of this. It's important that we pay attention to what is happening around us, because if we wait too long, there might not be like an opportunity for us to actually make a difference. So it has been wonderful, and I think it's there's more to do for sure. And also I just want to say maybe finally, I'm still processing all the things that have happened. There are I think things about like community trust, but like especially underserved communities and their trust to government. Those type, like that trust has been broken and damaged, and it takes probably years to rebuild. And there are so many other ways that this has impacted our communities that we're still processing. And I don't have maybe I'm still processing. I don't have perfect answers to how to resolve that yet. We're still taking it in. we know that the government said they have reduced the amount of enforcement on the streets. But I'm also hearing at the same time, no, there is massive enforcement operations in suburbs. They just sort of maybe moved. I'm hearing they moved away from the urban cities where there's a lot of eyes, and just went to where areas that they feel like they can just gotta harass and intimidate and terrorize people in isolation. But there are also folks that are keeping an eye on those things and connecting with each other. So that is the latest and that I have at this point.
So Abdullahi, I have two questions. You said so many things, and I'm making notes. We won't be able to hit them all, but one is, I think maybe for those people, I'm not in Minnesota, but I did see some of the footage there. But there's some people that didn't see the footage. So when you say harassment, and we're talking about freedom to move and intimidation, how did that look? If you could just kind of describe that. And then I wanted to ask you also to talk specifically about how the people showed up. What are some of the things the ways they did, and how did they organize themselves? And so those are the two questions.
So harassment in simple terms just looks like, an Uber driver, right? There was a viral video of a Somali Uber driver waiting for rides at the airport, and ICE agents and immigration enforcement folks just showed up and asked for his papers. And for not the reason they were not just asking everybody. They were going to people that looked like if they spoke, had an accent, so they could tell, oh, this person was not. And sometimes they say that, like, you have an accent, that's why I suspect that you are not an American. So can you show me a proof that you're American? Or it looks like just because you have a dark skin or brown skin, I suspect, and you're not white, I suspect that you are not American. Those types of things. Or it's kind of like driving on public, like I live about half a mile from a major road here in Columbia Heights, where there are a lot of immigrant businesses, Latino businesses, East African businesses, and it has been almost a staging grounds for immigration enforcement. People that work in these businesses were very afraid to show up to work. And the business owners were losing a lot of money because they don't have their employees who can show up to work. And this, like, the harassment has been happening in so many different ways, but eventually it just led to people being afraid to show up and just live their lives. And then the ways that folks have been showing support is just by organizing and just being watching out for each other and supporting their neighbors with legally, really. And there's a term, legal observer, which is like people that are trained to know their rights and the laws around immigration enforcement, and they know what is legal to do and what is not legal to do, and they can support their neighbors that way. And also, they can document. And because, like, when Alex Brady and Renee Good was murdered, the government initially denied and painted them as though they were agitators or they were some kind of domestic terrorists. If there were no proof, there was no proof or video evidence that they were not, it would have been very difficult to prove that. So there are, and that, to me, that was probably the most meaningful thing, was for me to know that if I'm stopped, and it was possibility that I will be stopped because I look like an East African, and the president made it, the federal government made it clear that, Somalis were not welcome in this country. So if I'm stopped or get harassed, I was hopeful that somebody would at least have a video evidence that, of what was happening. So that is how, and also the other ways that folks have been showing up is by protesting. I believe it was January 22. There was nearly about, was it 50,000 or so? Like thousands, tens of thousands of people that protested on a negative, the wind chill that there was like 37 under minus 37 degrees Fahrenheit. So for people to show up that much, and also that day, people closed their businesses and just kind of showed up in large numbers to say no to this type of like dehumanization of immigrants. No one is illegal. Humans are not illegal. Like if you have issues with people's documentation, there's a process to follow, and this country had that process forever. But what is happening now is just a different level of anti-humanity and anti-people and very narrow view of what America is. But thankfully, on the positive side, there are many, many wonderful human beings out there that are saying no to these types of actions.
Thank you. Yeah, you gave us some very specific things. So you had, I heard legal observers that have been able to help. Also, you're stating that the people that were recording, because sometimes people can record and they're in the way, but people that were actually recording and documenting, helping to support when the cases went before the federal government or there were questions about what the person was doing. And you hear that a lot sometimes with people of color. They say, well, what did they do? Like they must have done something if the police were, and it doesn't happen. And so that filming piece is very important. So thanks for sharing that so much. Nailah, how does the concept of movement intersect with other rights such as housing, employment, healthcare? How does this shape the overall mobility justice movement?
So I think the transportation system has really yet to reckon with its role in the terror it's inflicted, and that is inflicted in BIPOC communities. I think I started doing as I was already community organizing, but very early on, I was moving out of Oakland when Oscar Grant was killed. And for me, that is where the litany of names start, where we can start to name, especially in in that time frame, the amount of bodies that have been harmed or murdered on our streets, and how transportation and interaction at a traffic stop with a police officer, walking in our streets, biking in our streets. The litany of names that we say, majority of them start because of something to do with our transportation system. And that's just something we don't often reckon with. We silo transportation as its own thing sometimes, but often, because it is the connector, it often is sometimes the most unsafe place for bodies of people of color, right? It is the most vulnerable and raw. And so if we're not building with them in mind to protect those bodies, then we're excluding. We already talked about that. But that intersection, I think we're not really reckoning with our transportation and how it can cause harm and violence. We also don't reckon with the lack of the ability for folks to move, the isolation for our disabled community, for our elderly population, that there's just, it is not just about making sure that roads are safe, but it's about making sure that they connect to things, and not just things, but things that help people thrive and have a better life, and things that people want. And then also just, I think understanding too that the larger sense of mobility, the intersection of, I need to get out of the situation that I am in and move to something better. We need movement. We need transportation. We need access. And so I think we really have to start grappling with where the transportation system and how the transportation system can be all inclusive and sorry, I'm about to start coughing. Hold on. We really have to reckon with how the transportation system is playing a role or not playing a role in our ability to have upward mobility, have movement, thrive, have loving lives, connect to family, to connect to friends, connect to jobs, connect to better jobs, connect to communities. I mean, I think for me, the violence that is inflicted on our roads, and especially some of those more public instances that we've seen over the years, we really don't take account or hold our transportation system accountable. And so I think we have to start including our planning department, our long range planning. We have to really start grappling with how we can do a better job. Sorry.
No, you're doing a great job. You make sure you take some what we don't want you to choke, but you're doing a fabulous job, and you have brought so many poignant points to the top. One time when I was on the council some time ago, we did a study. It was called Driving While Black. A student from Vanderbilt had done it, and it just showed how many times that African Americans had a disproportionate amount of contact with the police. And to your point, it had escalated in other things. And the original stops were very unnecessary stops, and they since did away with that practice. But to your point, it oftentimes we don't think about how much transportation intersects with the amount of incidents that happen, unfortunate incidents happen with people of color, whether they're using the sidewalks, driving in a car, on a bus, just all the things that you shared. So that is a valid point. And hopefully we'll think more about it on the front end and not be so reactive about it on the back end. So thank you for sharing. Did you have one last closing point with that? Or you? Okay. Well, thank you. You did that. Okay, Jose, I've been looking at the chat too. People appreciate all the ideas that you're sharing. But when immigration enforcement creates fear in public spaces, how does that change the meaning of freedom of movement? How does that change it?
Yeah, so this is a long one for me. So if you have lunch plans, I cancel those. But I think, it's important to understand that the presence of this type of enforcement in public space is not new. I mean, we can see it today as part of the long history of U.S. immigration policy, where enforcement, race, aspects of public and private life are all interwoven together, right? And this is not my personal opinion. This is history, right? If you want to look at, we can start with the Mexican-American War, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, right? The loss of Mexico's half of their territory loss, right? We have states like California, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, parts of Wyoming and Colorado that had Mexican citizens who overnight became U.S. citizens, right? And all these promises were made. But we start looking at, like in California, the California Land Act of 1851, which basically in one generation, much of the land held by Mexican families were passed on to the hands of Anglo settlers, right? And this was all through just manipulation and racialization. We look at the book, this ever-changing book of colonization. It included the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which was really one of the first federal laws to exclude a group in active participation in American civic life. The list goes on, right? And that's why I say cancel your lunch plans, because I'm going to go on for a while here. But you got the Immigration Act of 1924, which kind of codified racial hierarchies in immigration systems. The Mexican Repatriation Act, right, which affected even family members of mine, right? That during the 1930s and during the Great Depression, an estimated 1 million U.S. citizens of Mexican descent, right? And that's only half of the people that were sent back to Mexico were rounded up, hunted down, whether they were at parks or workplaces or public areas, and shipped back to Mexico. And then you have the Bracero program of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, which is how my maternal grandfather came to the U.S. They welcomed the Mexican workers as labor, but never really accepted us as society, right? I think that's where the term dirty Mexicans came to be. A couple of years after that, in the 50s, we had Operation Wetback, which once again, mass deportation campaign that targeted Mexican laborers. Enforcement, once again, relied on racial profiling within the public right-of-ways. We had streets, transit stations, maybe a lot like what's happening today, right? And once again, the list goes on and on, man. We have the Immigration Nationality Act of 1965. And then during the 90s, we really start seeing more criminalization. It wasn't just about being rounded up and sent back to Mexico. It was about being criminalized, right? Being put in prison. We had the Secure Fence Act of 2006, which increased border militarization, even like the Real ID Act of 2010, right? Where you had to prove citizenship to get a driver's license. The Muslim travel ban policies of the 2017s, the zero tolerance policy of the 2018s, which, separated children from their family, literally placing children in cages. Like I said, the list goes on. And then today, last year, 2025, and today we're dealing with big, beautiful bills, acts, and executive orders. And once again, it just kind of shows that history has gone from state-funded militias to border militarization, from expansion of detention and deportation systems to criminalization of migration, restriction of entry based on certain regions or countries are coming from. And today we're seeing even federally sanctioned killings, right? So I guess with the long-winded rant out of the way, I think it's just critical for us to understand that mobility is not neutral and it reflects power, right? I think a lot of what you're hearing here kind of relates to that, that in today's context, movement has become one of calculation, right? We are forced to plan our routes differently. We avoid certain streets. We avoid certain places, no matter how critical those are to our family life. Sometimes we limit travel. And worst of all, sometimes we just withdraw from civic life altogether, right? So I think it's really about looking at today, which is becoming risk management, right? And it's really about our ability to, I guess, be visible while moving without the fear of being detained, separated from our families, or even loss of our own lives.
Thank you. Yes, you said a lot. I think yes, and I guess the point too is that it's always continuous, and we have to pay attention to what's going on because there's always certain groups that are signaled out, even though we're all Americans for whatever reason. Certain groups are signaled, and there's a concerted effort to remove them or to stigmatize them, and that we just have to be mindful of that it's not new, to your point. And if it's not new, we need to stay awake and do more planning and continue to speak up so that's continue to happen. So thank you so much for that. Abdullahi, this is your question. What are the potential impacts of discriminatory mobility policing on safety, economic opportunity, and access to essential services? And I'm sure you have a lot to say about that, being in Minnesota and just seeing what happened, just experiencing that in real time.
Yes, there's a lot to unpack there. But maybe just kind of, and I know we're almost time. I want to make sure we can also answer some of the questions here. But as I said earlier, there's a lot that we still don't know. The aggressive nature of immigration enforcement, and the way that there was just this clear disregard for the rule of law was just different this time. So the impact is will take some time for all of us to actually understand and know what the depth of that impact. But some of it is also known, right? Like there's the city of Minneapolis reported that they just 1 month they lost over $203 million due to as a direct result of the immigration enforcement. Majority of businesses that have been surveyed that are owned by Latino businesses reported, and this is over 65% of these businesses, reported that they lost over 50% of their revenues. And this is, again, like the numbers are connected to what I was talking about earlier. People are staying home because it's not safe to go outside, because there are just these massive SUVs. Sometimes without license plates, and people with masks and military grade ammunition and weapons that almost like see themselves as invincible, and see themselves as though they are above the law. So many folks, even if you are a citizen, you feel like you can't risk it today to go to work or to go to that medical appointment. And that's the result is the communities just the economic impact. That is the immediate, tangible, quantitative result. But I think even the more important impact is, what does that do to the fabric of society? What kind of signal does that send to wannabe dictator in this country, who is not 80 years old, like someone in power right now, who will try similar tactics in the future. Again, this is also built into all the things that my colleagues were talking about. Jose just went through all the past policies that were single-handedly targeting people that have been seen as other or not the preferred American. But now it's said publicly. These folks are saying that publicly, saying Somalis are trash. This is the first time I'm saying that word because it's very offensive as a Somali American to be called trash. But you don't expect something like that to come from the president of the United States. But when that president has the power of the federal government and our own tax dollars, it has another level of danger. But it's building on like centuries long practices that are anti people and anti-American, and narrow down what American really means. In our day-to-day, and I will conclude with this, I think, especially for those of us who are either engineers or planners or community organizers or do community engagement, what this means is when we go out there to our open houses or do pop-up events, we might see less people show up, and even if you see like large number of people, it will for sure in some communities mean some people will never trust the government for a long time, because we have all, before these aggressive enforcement actions, we've been carefully and methodically building trust with communities by recognizing their value, by appreciating their expertise, by compensating their time and expertise, and offering incentives and building that trust, where folks were thinking, no, I don't know if I can trust government. And sometimes folks don't differentiate between state, local, and federal government. So if the federal government is doing all these like horrible tactics, sometimes the local government will pay the price, because they are there. They are the ones that will have to do the comprehensive plans and the local roadway planning and all that work. So they will inherit all this bad baggage after this operation is over. I think we can rebuild trust, but it will take a lot of work and many more years to come, and many of us to continue doing this work.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to take it for questions, but to build on that point, I think the two takeaways from me from what you said, there were many takeaways, but the two that stick out the most is whenever you have discrimination and dehumanization of people, it's very inefficient. Not only is it not good for the soul, but it's inefficient, and it's economically, it's never, when you discriminate, it never makes sense. It's so inefficient. You talked about the millions of dollars that were lost. And that's what I'm talking about, like in 1 month, right? You talked about the businesses that closed down, the people that left, the people that can't get around. So even if people say, I'm more of a social justice lens, but even if you look at it economically, discrimination, it doesn't make sense. It's like economically, it's not a good plan. You're doing all the things, but it's just destroying the community as it relates to the economics. Because you said you lost how much in 1 month? That was a lot. Did you say 300 million?
203 million.
203. That's a lot of money.
1 month. That is what
in one. Yeah, that's a lot of money.
It could also be underreporting, because they're reliable. There's probably businesses that are not responding to those surveys, or however they collected that information.
Okay, so now we have an audience question. Thank you to our audience that's hanging in there with us. The question is, as a public servant working for a local government or transit agency, how can we influence our leadership to be brave and take bolder stances against potential ICE aggression on our communities? I worry that our communities do not feel safe on our systems as a result, and at the same time, our local governments often feel between a rock and a hard place if taking a bolder stance means losing federal funds to carry out important community projects. And that's to any one of you. It's 1:40. Nailah, José,
Yep.
Abdullahi.
I can jump in and answer, which is, I think this is not going to be the nice answer, but I think it is going to get us the most realistic results. And Erica, you touched on it a little bit. We have to, especially if you are a professional in this space, I think we have to get better at talking about the issues from multiple angles. And I think oftentimes we want to win people's hearts and minds. We want to talk about how this is the right thing to do. And we can get very righteous about that. And sometimes it comes to dollars and cents and practicalities. And so I think when I was a young organizer, we had an exercise where if I was trying to advocate for something, I would be presented with different people who had different views, and I'd have to figure out how to say the same thing, not lose my integrity, not water down my message, but what's the economic argument for it? What's the safety argument for it? How do we talk about these issues broader than just because we are multi-issued people, we are intersectional people with a lot of different interests, and that's going to pull at your heartstrings differently. And we're talking about changing institutions that have their own values, set of priorities. And so I think the broader that we can talk about, or the all the different ways that we can talk about an issue, the further along we will get. And sometimes that means maybe we're not going to mention that the benefits that it has for women because we don't know who our audience is. And maybe we just need to, in this setting, talk about the economic benefits of what a particular infrastructure, what new policy may do. And I think the more depth we can get at practicing all of that, the further along we can move in this movement. So it's not the nice answer, because I would love to just pull at heartstrings, and I would love for that to be the case, because what is right, right? And it shouldn't matter the dollars, it shouldn't matter the environment, the climate, none of that should matter. But unfortunately it does. And unless we learn how to speak that language, I think that's what's going to bridge the gap between where we are and where we want to be.
I think that's great. Okay, we have time for one more question. That was a great answer. Also, I think it's incumbent on us too, as leaders, activists, outreach professionals, when we go into certain communities, to be patient as well, just because of all the things that each of you have shared, because there is a distrust. The community and certain groups have been taken advantage of, and have not, and even if we don't want to use the word taking advantage, they've had negative experiences with government. So we shouldn't see it or be dismissive of it when we go into the community and say, oh, that's silly, they don't want to fill out this survey, because all it is a survey, and they should let it, or they don't want to come out and we're offering them this and it's for their community. And so to be kind of flippant about it, when we look at the lens that certain communities have been negatively impacted by government. So this is the next question. What does community engagement for transportation look like when even local governments can be seen as an intimidating to vulnerable groups like immigrants? How do we conduct outreach and make an ask of these groups when their freedoms to move, gather are infringed upon? How do we balance the need for engagement and knowing that we're asking members to take a risk to engage with us, especially in more diverse neighborhoods? Seems like I kind of teed it up, but that's the question.
Erica, do you mind reading the question again?
Yes, I can read it again. And we got 7 minutes left. Yes.
Okay.
So what does community engagement for transportation look like when even local governments can be seen as intimidating to vulnerable groups like immigrants? How do we conduct outreach and make ask of these groups when their freedom to move, gather is infringed upon? How do we balance the need for engagement and knowing that we're asking the members to take a risk to engage with us?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, because it's sort of like at the heart of what the work that I find myself doing, especially as a consultant, like doing people-centered and meaningful community engagement. I think it is. I feel like there are hints of an answer in the question itself, which is just being brave and raising the importance of meaningful engagement internally. And I'm assuming the person asking this is probably a staff member. Yes, there's some risk for staff members to speak up, especially if they are not don't have the power or in place of authority. They do have a power, but maybe they're not the decision maker internally. I've been there. I've been junior transportation planner with a lot of thoughts and ideas about how to do meaningful community engagement, especially communities that I feel like I understand and live in and have lived experience. But decision makers, directors and managers have maybe sometimes information that I don't have, or maybe they don't have the angle and the insights that I have. And often there are not enough opportunities for senior leaders within organizations and junior leaders and middle leaders in the middle of the organization to problem solve and work together. Anytime that somebody says, let's do better, I think we could do better community engagement with our vulnerable community members, with our immigrants, with our disability community, with all, like, you know, other community members that need more care, to actually reach out to them. Sometimes that might have not been, I don't know if we always give that the level of weight and consideration that it needs. It might just be, sometimes we might hear no, or don't give that the level of consideration that it needs. So I think this really has to start internally. Organizations, and also I don't want to put all that on the weight of just, you know, staff members, something like decision makers, and sometimes that decision maker is you, especially if you lead a team, or if you could elevate the issue. I think it's really important that leaders speak up and articulate. I think Nailah was talking about this, right? Articulate the what is at the stake, put into perspective the risks that you are taking if you don't do full engagement, because eventually you are putting out there projects that are not supported or don't have the full support of community members. So how do you know this really will work for community members if you didn't have the full participation of the communities that you need to consult with and work with? So it is more responsibility on decision makers, but sometimes I think it's also important for junior leaders to also just kind of brave it up and speak up. And yes, I understand what is at stake, because sometimes you don't know, you might take a risk that can jeopardize your own, you know, job but that is where it starts, I think.
Thank you so much. Okay, so time has flown. Each of you, Abdullahi, José, Nailah, I would like for you to take 1 minute to give some closing remarks. If you each do one, and then I have to do the ask for America Walks, because this is our wonderful organization that we believe in. So we do hope that people will give a donation today, and we hope that they enjoyed our Freedom to Move seminar that we had today, webinar. So we're going to start with Nailah. What's your one word? And then I like to give like takeaways. We can't just talk about all these. You are experts in your field. We're on this board. What are some takeaways that we can leave with our audience to do as it relates to freedom to move?
Okay, so I will be really quick, but I'm going to try and touch on a few things, which is, I think all the women in my bloodline, I have been the most free and liberated woman in my bloodline. If you go back generation and generation and generation, every woman in my bloodline in the new generation sees more freedom, more liberation. And there's nothing about this moment that makes me, in my history and my heritage, feel differently. These are really tough times, and it is really hard, and things are really, it can be really depressing and really scary. But what's the Martin Luther King? We always been to the arc of justice. And I personally, from where I sit as a Black woman, have seen it. Every woman has had challenges, but we've been towards liberation and justice. And I think it is just really important for us to hold that as like a good North Star, that where we are today is not where we will be tomorrow. And if we all engage, then we have opportunities to help shape what that new world looks like in our liking. And so I think if you get involved, there's no wrong way to be involved. Just get involved somewhere. And one of those ways is donating to America Walks as well.
I love it. Thank you. We're 158. All right, José.
Yeah, I'll keep my simple, just kind of going off with Abdullahi's message was I really feel we need to look at community engagement as relationship building. I think we need to be proactive, right? I saw in there was a question about, our ask, maybe we shouldn't be asking. Maybe we should be going to these communities and offering to support the initiatives they want to lead, right? And bringing something with us. And I think we really need to start shifting how we look at engagement to really be that relationship building that trust, and really taking on this community-led initiatives that I think could really mean a lot more to the work that we're doing.
Thank you, José. Abdullahi, you got 30 seconds. They took some of your time.
I'll make it even shorter. I think I would just end with explore how you can exercise your own power and influence in decision making for the better.
Thank you so much. A big hand to all of the panelists, my board members who I appreciate so much. Extra shout out to America Walks. Thank you for allowing us to do this. All right. And we're closing on out. Thank you for attending.